Hello everybody. So in this video, we're going to be going over how to use image adjustment layers. Image adjustment layers are really the most basic way to edit your photos on Photoshop. For this video, we're going to be using just a basic photo that I took out by the lake, by my house, but you can really use any photo just to go over these skills. Alright, so first things first. Once you have your photo up, you're going to go down to the bottom right side of your screen, and you're going to look at your layers panel, which is right here. Now, we'll talk more in depth about our layers panel later on, but what I do want to point out to you is the bottom of the layers panel, which is like right at the bottom right side of your Photoshop. You'll see a bunch of little icons, and one of them is this little circle. It's half black, half white. It almost looks like one of those black and white cookies. And what you're going to do is you're going to click that, and you'll see that this big menu comes up. And this menu has all of our adjustment layers in it. So we're only going to be going over these 3 sections. And the first section we're going to be going over is brightness and contrast. So these 4 are brightness and contrast options, and we're just going to start off with the brightness and contrast one. This is really the most basic lighting control on Photoshop. It gives you 2 scales, one for brightness, one for contrast. And you'll notice as you move those scales around, it'll obviously change the brightness when you change the brightness scale. And contrast, if you're unaware of what the word means. When you add contrast, you're basically making the photo a little bit more dramatic. So it makes the darker areas of a photo darker and the lighter areas of a photo lighter. Okay, so right now we have our adjustment layer, and you'll notice that once we clicked brightness and contrast, it created like this new layer on our layers panel. We want to move on, and I want to show you a couple of different adjustment layers. So what we're going to do is, instead of deleting this adjustment layer, which we easily can do by just clicking and deleting it, we are going to hide the adjustment layer instead by clicking this little eyeball right here. So now we're going to go back to our little cookie right here, and we're going to move on to a more advanced lighting control in Photoshop called curves. Now with curves, honestly, I don't really have a rhyme or reason of how I use curves. I just kind of like it better. You'll see that this little thing comes up in your properties panel. It's kind of like a little graph, right? And it has a point at the bottom left and a point at the top right. And what I do is I like to click right in the middle to create another point, and then you move that point around, and it kind of creates a different look. You can add multiple points, which kind of creates for a more interesting lighting effect. But that's really the difference and what makes it a little bit more advanced than the regular brightness and contrast. Okay, so we're going to hide that layer. And now we're going to move on. Like I said, there's a bunch, but we're only going to go into the ones that I find important. So those were the kind of like the lighting controls that we went over, and you can feel free to explore the other ones. But now we're going to jump down to the color options. So the first one that we're going to jump into is vibrance. All right, so vibrance, another really, really simple one. You have the vibrance scale, which when you move that one, you'll notice that it kind of just like makes the color a little bit more vibrant, right? But saturation, on the other hand, saturation is a word that is used a lot when we're referring to color. And essentially what it does is it makes a color way, way, way more intense. So when we bring that saturation up, you'll notice the color is getting very, very intense. Now, saturation seems to work really, really good on this specific setting, but sometimes if you bump up saturation too much, you'll actually end up getting a lower quality photo because it starts to bring out all the imperfections. It starts to make it look a little bit pixelated. All right, so let's hide our vibrance layer. And now we are going to go back to our adjustment layers. And this last color option that I want to show you is hue/saturation. Fun fact, hue, the word hue is another word for color. So when you're changing the hue of an image, you're really just kind of like moving the color wheel. So watch what happens as I drag my scale. You'll notice that it kind of turns it into an alien looking situation. That's because it's changing all the colors on the color wheel. So that's just kind of a little fun tidbit of information. Now you'll also see there's another saturation option, but I wouldn't ever go too far up with the saturation on this specific adjustment layer, because check out those gnarly looking pixels. Really starts to come out. It really takes away from the quality of the photo. So if you're going to use saturation on the hue/saturation adjustment layer, a little goes a long way. Lightness, I try to avoid the scale altogether. So last thing on here, when you first actually open up the hue saturation adjustment layer, one thing that a lot of people like to do is they like to create a colorization instead. To do that, you check off this little colorize area right here. And then you'll notice that you can actually choose the color that you want to colorize it as. The one thing that I notice is that it always brings the saturation down a little bit. So I would always just bring that up a tad. But yeah, this is cool because it kind of gives you a monochromatic look for your photo. Another thing that you can do with this is you can bring saturation all the way down to the left, and it turns it into a black and white photo. All right, so now we're going to hide that. I do want to point out that an easier way to get a black and white photo is just by clicking the black and white option. But we're going to move forward from these color options and move down to the very last section, which are special effects. The first special effect that we're going to go into is invert. And if anybody's familiar with that word, they might know exactly what invert does. It essentially creates a negative of your photo. And if you're familiar with darkroom, then you definitely know what a negative is. All right, so let's hide that one. The other two I want to show you are posterize and threshold. So let's click posterize real quick. And you'll notice when you do posterize, it kind of creates a color cartoon look. And it allows you to change the level. So it basically changes the amount of colors that you're actually adding in. It's interesting. I mean, there's definitely a certain look that this goes with, and it's good to know how to do it. But there's not many instances where you're gonna do this in actual photography. So let's hide that. And last but not least, threshold. So threshold is very similar to what we just looked at, but instead of being a color cartoon look, it gives you more of that inky cartoon look where it's just basic black and white. This works a lot better when you're working with faces and stuff, not so much with landscapes like what we're working on right now. So that is pretty much it. I'm excited to see what you guys do with adjustment layers. Please feel free to look through some of the options that we didn't go over and have fun with it. Good luck!